Hello everyone and welcome to my presentation about the benefits of whole food plant-based nutrition. I'm very happy that you choose to follow my presentation today, and I hope that by the end of my talk, you will walk away and you will be even more excited about including more plant foods in your diet. During my presentation, I will share with you some of my personal experience with adding raw foods in my diet and the benefits I experienced as a result of doing that. In the second part of my presentation, I will share with you some of the results of the peer-reviewed scientific research that shows that eating a whole food plant-based diet is beneficial for our health. Maybe you are someone who has been trying to include more plant foods in your diet, but you still doubt whether this lifestyle is worth the extra effort. So I hope that when I finish my talk, you will be convinced that it's definitely worth to give this lifestyle a try. Before I start to talk about the various benefits of a plant food diet, let me introduce myself. My name is Zuzana van der Werf-Kulichova and I'm Slovak. Probably you can hear that from my accent. I have been living in the Netherlands since 2005, and I have been eating a high raw plant-based diet for over 7 years now. Including raw unprocessed food in my diet transformed my life, and you will soon understand how. If someone asks me what I'm passionate about, two things come to my mind. I love to study and I love to explore new subjects. And here on this slide, you see pictures of me doing some curious work. And I finished 2 master's degrees, one in agricultural economics and another one in environmental sciences. And I also have a PhD in the politics of controversial scientific innovations. My other major passion involves my family. Here on this picture, you can see my children. I'm mother of 4 girls. I'm wife to my husband, Peter, and I also have a dog, rescue dog. And I must confess that combining my 2 passions for research and education and for my family has not always been easy for me. You will soon understand why. So when I started my PhD in 2010, I was 7 months pregnant with our first baby, Elizabeth. Just 2 years later, I gave birth to our second daughter, Christina. At this point, managing research and my 2 young children went quite well, but things started to get more overwhelming when I gave birth to our third daughter, Dominica. This was in 2014. During this time, I was in the middle of my fieldwork, and I couldn't keep up with all the demands that I imposed on myself. So at the beginning of 2015, I found myself burnout and exhausted. I mean, it was not very surprising because in 3 years I gave birth to 3 children, which meant being continuously pregnant, sleep deprived, and breastfeeding, while I was trying to finish my PhD and also develop and teach a course for 100 university bachelor students. So my physical and my mental body gave up on me, and I couldn't sleep. I was anxious and I felt lost, really, to be honest with you. And I didn't know what to do. But I knew that medications were not an option for me. So I started to do what I like to do anyway, and that is to research. And this is when I found the whole food, plant-based diet and raw foods. So to my big surprise, the results started to show very quickly after I started to eat more healthy foods. I regained my determination to finish my PhD, and I felt so enthusiastic about my newfound energy that I decided to get pregnant again. I know, sounds crazy, but I wanted it very badly, so I did it. And so I defended my PhD on October 25, 2016. It was a year after I felt burnout, and I gave birth to our 4th daughter, Matilda, in November 2016, just 3 weeks after my PhD defense. And my 4th daughter was born exactly on the date of my promoter's birthday, which was a really nice coincidence. So the pictures you see here on this slide are from my graduation ceremony, And on the right, you see the article that was written about my PhD journey while parenting for children. This article is available online for those who are interested. I like to say that I attribute a large part of my success to raw foods. Eating a diet with a high percentage of calories from raw fruits and vegetables helped me to discover myself in ways I never imagined were possible. My mental clarity improved, my lifelong constipation resolved, and I learned to be kinder to myself and better manage my own ambitions. Furthermore, even after 4 pregnancies, I feel great in my body and I'm enthusiastic about sharing my experience with anyone interested in exploring this amazing way of eating. So, this was a short summary of my story, and now I would like to talk about the scientifically proven benefits of eating more fresh fruits and vegetables and more whole plant foods in general. As I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, I have been eating a high raw diet for over 7 years now. During this time, I have been bringing my food to weddings, to family gatherings and holidays, and there is always one initial reaction I have often faced. I could never eat this way. And I mean, yes, I understand. Swapping a wedding cake for fruits may not seem appealing to everyone initially. However, I notice that people often get interested in including more whole foods in their diet when they learn about the many benefits of doing so. And therefore, in the following slides, I will share some of the most exciting benefits of the whole food plant-based diet that I hope you will remember for a long time to come. We are what we eat. And I'm sure that most of you are familiar with this quote. Indeed, our diet shapes how we feel, how we look, and how we behave. And in the past 2 decades, numerous studies have been conducted and published that focus on understanding of the relationship between what we eat and how we feel and how we behave. This research focuses on the understanding of human microbiota, and human microbiota consists of various microorganisms such as bacteria, viruses, and fungi. And these microorganisms live in the human digestive tract. You can think of these microorganisms as a world on their own that lives inside of our body. All organisms in our digestive tract have their functions, and they form communities of the same species, so-called colonies. These colonies can be good for us, but some of the colonies might be not as beneficial for our health. And therefore, sufficient colonies of friendly bacteria are essential in protecting us from harmful microorganisms and assisting us in the metabolism of essential nutrients. Research suggests that the potential disturbances in microbiota balance, such as the lack of diversity in microbial communities or the predominance of harmful microorganisms, have links with the most prevalent modern diseases. The food we eat is the most critical determinant that shapes the composition and the diversity of our microbiota. Research suggests that diets that have a high intake of fruits and vegetables and are rich in fiber are associated with higher diversity of richness of beneficial gut microorganisms. There was an article published in 2014 in the leading peer-reviewed journal Nature that showed that dietary changes can rapidly and always reproducibly alter human gut microbiome composition. So let's look together at what most people in Western societies eat every day. I would say that the standard Western diet is characterized by a high intake of animal protein and high intake of saturated fat. In addition to this, there is also a high intake of refined carbohydrates, salt, and calories. This diet is also typically low in essential nutrients, antioxidants, enzymes, and fiber. And in the coming slides, I will be focusing on how the consumption of animal protein and saturated fat influences our microbiome. So as I said before, the foods on the standard Western diet taste great. But unfortunately, this diet doesn't have an excellent clinical reputation regarding its impact on our health. Processed food that have become staples in Westernized societies have fundamentally different nutritional characteristics as compared to minimally processed foods. Consumption of these foods tend to support the formation of colonies of non-beneficial gut bacteria, known to cause many modern diseases. For example, consumption of Western diets has been linked to high blood glucose, obesity, and cardiovascular and autoimmune diseases. This figure that you see right here is adapted from a research article that was published in 2017, and it was a review of 168 scientific research papers that were focusing on the relationship between diet and the gut microbiome and our health. And in the following slides, I will explain how this works in practice. So in this slide, I'm going to focus on the role of animal protein on our gut microbiome. And I decided to choose this topic because most people who consume the standard Western diet believe that they need to include animal food in their diet to get sufficient quantity. But most importantly, they believe the quality of the animal protein is superior to plant-based protein. So let's look at what kind of qualities animal protein has by looking at its impact on gut microbiome changes and health outcomes. So this figure that you see here is sourced from this research article that I mentioned previously. And on the left side of this slide, we can see the type of animal protein that researchers used to focus on in this research paper. So it was the beef from cow meat. And in the first step of this figure, you can see the population of gut microbiota, how they change when we consume this beef animal protein. So the population of bacteria, which is depicted in red, is going to increase, and the population of bacteria that is depicted in green is going to decrease. As a result of that, you can see the step number 2 are the different kind of metabolites are produced by these bacterial colonies, and those in red that we increase are producing so-called TMAOs. And these TMAOs are called trimethylamine N oxide. And these are the kind of metabolites that are not very good for us. There has been research regarding these metabolites that shows that presence of these metabolites have links to cardiovascular diseases. So they are sort of pro-atherogenic compound. On the other hand, you see that the population of bacteria depicted in green decreased, and by then also decreased their metabolites. And these metabolites are called short-chain fatty acids, and I will explain about them a little bit later. For now, I just want you to understand that when we consume beef protein, we are creating the population of bacteria that are known to increase our risk for cardiovascular disease. The second issue that most people who consume a standard Western diet do not realize is that most animal-derived foods that are believed to be high in protein are actually also very rich in saturated fat. In addition, there are other sources of saturated fats that are consumed on standard Western diet, and these include palm oil, that is the most common ingredient of processed foods, and also contains a high amount of saturated fat. And people also often consume cheese that is high in saturated fat, chocolate, for example, and coconut oil is also high in saturated fat, although this one is not commonly consumed on the standard Western diet. And in this slide, I would like to illustrate how the excess consumption of saturated fat contributes to various health challenges, such as type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and stroke. So let's look together at this review research paper and examine the relationship between saturated fat, gut microbiota changes and the metabolic outcomes. So research shows that when we eat saturated fat, we are increasing the population of gut bacteria that are depicted here in green. And there is, as a result of the increase of this population of bacteria, we are creating different metabolic outcomes. So if we look at the top of the figure, we see that we are increasing the white adipose tissue inflammation. This means, in other words, that our fat cells are enlarged and we are prone to store more fat and have less lean body mass. As a result of this, which is not absolutely clear from this graph, but there is a really strong correlation between these two, our insulin sensitivity tends to decrease, that you see at the bottom of these metabolic outcomes. So the more fat we have in our body, the less insulin sensitive we tend to be. And this has really important implications because insulin sensitivity is important in the escorting of the blood glucose to our cells. So our cells can actually use this fuel and function properly as they are supposed to. So when we are not insulin sensitive, the blood sugar remains high. And if this is the case over a long period of time, then we are prone to develop type 2 diabetes. Another problem with this population of bacteria that was reported in this research review is that the saturated fat also increases our bad LDL cholesterol. So you can really see that those foods that have a large amount of saturated fat in them may taste really amazing, but they are not as good for our health. So I hope that by now you are starting to warm up to eating more plant-based foods in your diet. And so let me summarize some of the main characteristics of the low-fat, whole-food, plant-based diet. On this slide, I included pictures of the foods that I typically eat in my diet. I do not eat many cooked foods, so I don't have many pictures of cooked foods, but I hope that this is a nice representation of what a low-fat, whole-food, plant-based diet can look like. If you look at the characteristic of the raw food diet or the whole food plant-based diet, even cooked, you will notice that this diet is generally low in saturated fat, low in protein, salt, and calories. So it's exactly the opposite of the standard Western diet. This diet doesn't include refined carbohydrates, and most food consumed on this diet are high in essential nutrients and water and fiber. So as I mentioned before, most people on the standard Western diet believe that the quality of plant protein is somewhat inferior to animal-based protein. So with this slide, I would like to demonstrate that this is false. On the contrary, plant protein seems to be more beneficial for our microbiota and our overall health outcomes. So for this study, researchers choose to focus on pea protein. And they observed that pea protein consumption leads to an increase of gut bacteria, which you see depicted in red, and decrease of bacteria in green. As a result of that, because we are increasing the population of the beneficial bacteria depicted in red, we are also going to increase the production of the good metabolites, so-called short-chain fatty acids. And the short-chain fatty acids are important for our health because they have been shown to help to decrease inflammation in the body, strengthen the gut barrier in our body, and also improve glucose and lipid metabolism. So when you are considering these findings, you may actually start to understand that the plant protein is not so bad after all. Now let's look together at what happens in our bodies when we stop eating the fat from animal products, processed food, and cheese, and instead include some nuts, seeds, and avocados in our diet in moderation. As a result of this, the population of specific bacteria, depicted in green, will increase. And you can maybe remember that on the previous slide when we talked about saturated fat, the bacteria that increased from the consumption of saturated fat were increasing the white adipose tissue inflammation, whereas the bacteria that are produced that are present in our body after eating unsaturated fat, they actually decrease the white adipose tissue inflammation. That means that we are going to have less fat inflamed cells in our body. And another thing which will happen when this population of bacteria is increasing is that we will decrease the activation of the TLR receptor, which is called toll-like receptor. And this receptor activation is involved in autoimmune diseases such as rheumatoid arthritis, for example. And it has been also linked to atherosclerosis and cancer. So you can see that it's pretty significant what happens when we choose to eat saturated or unsaturated fat. If we switch the saturated fat for unsaturated fat, we will be also experiencing decrease in LDL cholesterol, and the scientific studies show that this decrease actually happens very quickly within 10 to 14 days, which is pretty exciting. So, and this is my final slide because I think that I already provided a lot of information for you to start to understand the benefits of the whole food plant-based diet. So with this slide, I would like to summarize the major differences between the standard Western diet and the whole food plant-based diet that we discussed today. This figure that you see here comes from the article that I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation that was published in Nature. This is a very important journal in the scientific field with a high impact factor. It's a prestigious journal. And the main conclusion of this article and also of my presentation today are the following. If you care about your microbiome, eat less fat and protein and more fiber. And the yellow circle in this slide shows which diet wins when the health of your gut microbiome is your priority. I would like to thank you all for listening to my presentation, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask.